We're going to do a series, though, on, it's about 8 weeks. We have a few international guests coming in during it, but we're doing a series on great, and a lot of things about it. We're going to talk today about the greatness of God. Next week, we're actually talking about the greatness of you. So it's this week is great God. Next week is great me. Very strange thing to teach in a church, because here's what's happened. We are so removed from Scripture and so dominated by our cultural perceptives of things that we forget that God has raised us up. And we equate humility with losing. We think losers are humble, winners are proud. That's not true. That is like, it's not even, they have nothing to do with each other. Winning has to do with whether or not you're good at whatever you're doing. Pride and humility has everything to do with your heart. I've been around a lot of losers who were totally full of themselves. Been around a lot of winners who walked in humility. I'm telling you, don't get into this. And it's crept into the church that we think if we're going to be humble, because God calls us to be humble, if we're going to be humble, then we're also going to be lousy. And so, we do it that way because we want to be humble. Or, we don't want to, we're okay with that, not being so good because, we just want to be humble. We just got to hear, and we're going to really get out next week, winning and losing has nothing to do with pride and humility. Being good or being bad has nothing to do with pride and humility. They can be related, but they could be related either way. Yeah. They just could. So what my real heart is, and I spend a lot of time with young people and any people, is to have us reach the call God has given us, whatever that would be. And newsflash, you're called to really great things in your life. Really great things. You like that great? Look at that. Greatness has entered the building. There we go. But watch this, though. I want you to hear this. Because we've bought into humility means you're no good, or no good means you're humble. Because we've bought into that, we're afraid to step out into anything great. We're afraid to believe God for anything amazing. We're afraid to say, God has given me talents and abilities and resources, whatever it would be, but we're afraid to say, and I'm going to use them for His glory, and bam, it's going to be so good. We're afraid of that, and so we live a Christian life retreating, saying, well, I don't know. I guess I need to... See, we equate godly humility, we think of, and I don't even know what generation knows Eeyore, but Eeyore is not humility. Woe is me. Guess it's going to rain today. That is not humility. That is demonic. I am not saying Eeyore is demonic. All you Winnie the Pooh fans out there. But that mentality is not of God. It just isn't. And so don't think it is. I'm calling all of us to rise up to what God called us to be. That's what is humility? Humility is this. Humility is recognizing a great God and then recognizing that the great God has called me to whatever He's called me to, and me embracing that call and walking it out by faith because He called me. That's humility. Does that mean that sometimes people will know your name? Yes. Just because somebody knows your name doesn't mean you're not humble. What about if people say, wow, she's really good at that, or he's amazing at that? Does that mean you're not humble? No, it just means that they recognize something going on in your life. That's all it means. And so we're gonna get to a place where we're gonna get a hold of this. And I'm telling you, when we get a hold of this, watch out, because the biggest thing that I believe has kept the body of Christ in check is this belief or this spirit that we're of no value, that we are to just exist and play the martyr's role. We're not. Now, we might be a martyr, but we're not to intentionally play a martyr's role. We are to walk with our head high and say, a great God has called me and has raised me up, and look out, because here we come. And when we get a hold of that, I'm telling you, something amazing is going to happen in your life and collectively all over that. So that's kind of the heart of this series on the greatness. We're going to talk about a lot of things. It's going to be some fun. I'm going to commit to you this. So some of you will be so happy about this. Here's what every preacher in the world knows. You know what the easiest thing for a preacher to do is? Speak long.
Speak long.
Do you want me to?
Yeah.
Okay. They're cheering. No, it's very easy to just talk for a long time. I jokingly say sometimes I talk until I say something. But I really want to, I know every preacher always also knows this. It's harder to be short because you have to watch every word and you have to be careful of every word. And so this is my new commitment or whatever, especially for this series. I want like bells and sirens to go off after 25 minutes and a trap door sucks me up. Now, I really want to commit to be short because I believe this. I believe God has things for us that we can't doze off for. This isn't a time to check out. This isn't a time to check whatever social media you like, because let me just tell you, nothing's happening at 10:45 in the morning on your social media platform. It's not a time to do that. This is a time to say, God, I am focused. Bam, here I am. Here's why. If something is 8 minutes long, and you know that you can't miss any of them, you're into it for 8 minutes. Period. And so I want to commit to you, and I want you to commit to God on this. I'm staying focused because God has things that will change my life. And so I did it this morning. Hallelujah. And so I'm going to do it now. So open up to Exodus chapter 3 if you would. And I want to talk to you today about the first thing. If you're to understand greatness at all, we must understand ultimate greatness. And if you want to, at the highest thing, at the superlative of all superlatives, is God. If you want your life to even remotely elevate above the dust, then we need to see something really big, really amazing, really awesome, really great. And that is God himself. And so as we get into this, I'm going to just come back to a few things that are continually going to they're driving me, and I hope they drive you. And here's what I want us to do. I want us to focus on God, and I want to focus on a big God, a great God, an amazing God. Why do I want to focus on God? Because here's why. Your focus determines your future.
Yeah. Period.
Whatever you look at, that's where you're going. No questions asked. If you're staring at something, as you hit certain, many of you have been driving a car for a long time. So you just do it because you know this is how you drive a car, because I've driven, X amount of million miles. But when you're teaching somebody, you have to be reminded of everything that goes into driving a car. And here's the basic thing. If you're driving, and then you're looking, what eventually happens? You veer that way. Always. So therefore, little driving class, this is where you want to look. Because that's where you go. You always get there. You go that, you're like, how come I'm going that way? Because you're staring that way. Wherever you're focusing, your focus is your future. Period. So I want us to stare at something that will change us. You will become like that which you look at. What you look at, that's what you'll turn into. Now watch what happens in our society, and this is not new. But probably the greatest thing that many people stare at, I mean like looking for details at and concerned about, is a mirror. Right? You're looking for all kinds of details in a mirror. Well, newsflash, there's nothing in a mirror. In fact, your mirror looks way different than mine. Your mirror looks better than mine. I see people look at the mirror and I think, man, let me see how good that looks. It always looks the same. But if our focus is on the mirror, we will become like that which we're focusing on. And you say, well, that's okay. I like myself. Let me tell you what you're looking at. Don't be alarmed by this. You're staring at something that is heading to death. I thought I looked better than that. Well, just wait a few years. It gets there. I mean, you notice. Wow. I'm telling you, the more we stare at something that is decaying, all we do is we get into this vicious cycle of trying to reverse something that is on its way out. Please keep looking at mirrors. I have no problem with that. I'm just saying when our focus is just on ourselves, we cannot improve ourselves because ourselves are dying. So if we want to improve ourselves, what do we have to do? We have to focus on something greater. We have to focus on something that's ever increasing. Even if we want to increase our beauty, so to say, look at something that is ever increasing in beauty. What is ever increasing in beauty? It is the Lord himself. He's ever increasing. He's ever getting, I know he can't get better, but you understand what I'm saying. He also can't get worse. He's eternal and all these things. But our focus determines our future, and I want us to be determined to focus on a great God. It'll change everything about us. So I can't talk about a great God without talking about us. It just, everything changes when we see a great God. We understand who we are when we understand who he is. And we're going to get a lot into that next week, but I just want to prime that for you now. Let's go to the story of Moses. And I was going to go to a lot of places, but this morning, first service, I got to one place, so I'm probably only going to get to one place here too. Exodus chapter 3. Let me give you the setting of this. Moses at this point is 80 years old. And he was born. He had a really cool birth. You know about that. That's Exodus chapter 2. Didn't do a whole lot for 40 years. At age 40, he thought, man, I'm going to do something with my life. And so he killed a guy. It's not the greatest entry into life thing. Here I come. Bam. Well, there I go. So then he ran away for 40 years. He has literally done nothing, if you want to say, to fulfill the call on his life for 80 years. This is where we pick him up. I want you to hear that because it's easy to just look back and think of great Moses. Moses was awesome. He was amazing. I wish we had Moses as a leader. I wish Moses was in charge of this and that. You need to understand that for 80 years, this is what his resume looked like. I had a really cool birth. At age 40, I killed a guy. You want me? That's his resume. Anybody here who's ever hired anybody would not hire that guy unless you're like into the mafia or something like that. And he's got nothing, but he still has a call on his life, but nothing was going to happen to him until he saw the burning bush. Yeah. Let's see how that happened, though, because there's something about this that we've got to get a hold of. Verse 1 of chapter 3 of Exodus. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law. He didn't even own any sheep at this point, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. That's a cool thing that we won't get into there. There, at this mountain in the desert, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So that was unusual. Bushes on fire weren't that unusual. A bush burning that wasn't being consumed was unusual. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. You know this story well, but I want us to see there's something here that changed everything. The bush didn't change anything. The fire didn't change anything. What changed everything was when the bush was burning. Okay, Moses over here is tending his flock. He looks over, bush is on fire. Bush is on. It's not. There's something different about this bush. And he set his gaze on it, He looked at it. He walked that way. He was intent on it. He was focused on it. He knew this was not a bush on fire. He said, there's something more here. And he focused on the bush. At that moment, watch what it says. When Moses, I'll go up there. Verse 4, when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called him. I like that. There's a lot of people God wants to call. There are very few who are staring at him. God's not just walking around plucking people out of crowds. God is putting things in front of us that if we focus on him, he'll pull us out. 80 years, Moses never stared at God. In year 80, he says, what's going on here? And God's like, yes, I finally got him. And at that point, he appeared to him, and he says, Moses, however the movies do it. And he says, here am I. And then he got the old, take off your sandals, hallow ground, and all that stuff. In this conversation, though, in the staring, what he did was, in there, Moses begins the discussion. We'll talk about it next week. He says, hey, who am I? I don't get this. What's going on? Save that for next week. And then he says, who are you, God? And I love this. So good. God's been around a while. This is the first time he ever said this. He says, I'm Yahweh. He says, I am who I am. I'm the great I am. I just am. You can't even define me. He says, I'm so wow. He says, I am Yahweh. First time God's ever revealed himself like this to anybody. Why did he reveal himself like this to Moses? Well, I get the whole God called him and stuff like that. But please understand, a lot of you have amazing calls and you've never fulfilled it. Why? Because I believe we've never stared at God to the full extent where he's got us. And he can then direct us. And so it was with Moses. He stared at the bush, saw it was more than a bush, saw it was the Lord, and he gazed on it. And at that point, he caught this, wow, vision. And everything changed. From that moment on, everything in history changed. Everything. What changed? Did God change? No. God was fine. He was always the same. He's doing well. In fact, if you read Exodus chapter 1, it had been 80 years. 80 years ago, God said, I'm going to go rescue these people. He waited 80 more years. There's only one chapter in our Bible. But these poor Hebrew slaves, Jimmy talked about it last week, all they knew for every generation was brick making. That's all they knew. God waited a whole nother 80 years. But the only thing that was different at this moment was Moses saw the greatness of God. I think it was last week Jimmy was saying, it seems like 3 years ago he was here. Was it really just last week? I don't know what I did this week, but I must have lived multiple weeks in one. But he said, it's easy to convince when you're convinced. Easy. Well, Moses for 80 years had a big question mark over his head. He lived a question mark. Who am I? What am I doing? I don't know. I'll just hang out with these sheep. I don't mind Midian. I like this wilderness. Look, there's a cool mountain. Here we go. Nobody's trying to kill me. I got a wife, whatever. I mean, that was just his life. Nothing. But at this moment of the burning bush, he was convinced. He was given the hardest leadership role in the history of humanity. No question about it. You think it'd be hard to be president of America? Imagine being Moses. Impossible. But watch this. Moses didn't waver. Now, he was not always happy. He had a lousy job. But he didn't waver. Why didn't he waver? Because he was convinced that he saw the Lord. Could never shake that. Never shake that. He saw the Lord. He was convinced that he saw the Lord. Watch this. Even God had second thoughts. Remember that at one point God said, you know what, Moses? I'm tired of these guys. Moses is probably thinking, yeah, you should be me. God said, I'm tired of these guys. I'm going to wipe them all out, and I'll start over with you, Moses. Now, anybody in their right mind would say, yes, finally. It's going to be so much easier. Worst case scenario, I'm going to have a small household. But watch what happens. God was ready to wipe out all of Israel, all the Hebrews, and start with Moses. Watch what Moses does. He literally stood in the gap right here. He's the greatest picture of intercession. God's going to kill them all. And they were all giving Moses a hard time, just so you know that. This was awful for Moses. Moses stood in the gap and said, no. Why would he ever do that? Because he was convinced that this was God. He was convinced of it. He was willing to die for it because, watch this, when you encounter a great God, you died that moment. You have to die that moment. If you didn't die, you didn't encounter him. Just didn't. Because there's something about encountering a holy God that we can't live. We're done. And Moses was done at the burning bush. And he knew from that moment on, although it was going to be a really odd journey, he was convinced at the greatness of God. And so because he was convinced of the greatness of God, he was able to lead people into the purposes of God. So here's the in the band, you guys can come on up. Oh, I'm just looking around. Where'd they go? Thank you, Jen, for popping up. But watch this, though. Watch how we just, this is my challenge for us. And we're going on like an 8-week journey. There's multiple things happening in these 8 weeks. It's going to be a very exciting 8 weeks. Let me just say to you, don't miss it. Don't check out of this, because here's what you need to hear. There's 3 ways that we need to walk in the presence of God, or encounter God, or see a great God. One is so primary, and that is corporately getting before an almighty God. Corporately meaning you're gathering with people and you're collectively saying, you're a great God. Now, as that happens, the reason we need that is because, one, God delights, he actually commands his blessing when the brethren walk in unity. So he's commanding the blessing when we're doing it together. That is reason enough. If you say, gee, I'd like to be blessed by God, here's a guaranteed way to be blessed by God. Walk in unity before God with others. Blessing. It's there. The blessing is commanded upon you. And so we've got the blessing on it. Watch what also we have. This is a really key thing. Talk to anybody who's been doing this a while. And that is this. All of us will go off here. All of us will take our eyes and go this way, and our car drifts that way. Well, you do that for long enough and you crash. And you're probably going to take some people out with you. And so watch this. If you're get away from that car analogy, it's not going to work like this. But if I'm in a row of people and we're heading that way, marching, if you want to say, right? And watch this. I'm having a weak moment. I'm like this, right? Well, I start to drift this way. What do? I run into the guy next to me. Oh, I guess I'll go back here. Well, I'm just going to quit. Oh, there's a line coming behind me, pushing me. Oh, I guess I'm going to go. Right? And so why do we need corporate times of encountering God? Because we're weak. We're weak. It's totally, absolutely. People say, well, you go to church because you're weak. I said, 100% correct. That's why I gather with people. Because I know my tendencies are to veer. You won't veer when you're corporate. So we corporately encounter the presence of God. What else do, and I could really get onto that because I could tell you story after story after story of crashes and burns. Almost all of them begin with, I'm just going to drive on my own for a while. It's always the case. And then you got to go get a tow truck and pull them back. Just avoid that. It's a whole lot easier. It's cheaper and easier. So don't do that. And the other thing, please do this. We intentionally, individually stare at the great God. What does that mean? I mean, there are times, I don't know what it is, 5 minutes, 5 hours. I don't care. Can be literally in a closet, can be walking anywhere. but you're intentionally saying, this is my moment to stare at this great God. Do it all by yourself. Don't do it only all by yourself, because you're staring at the great God, you'll start staring at other things. But you need corporate. You need individually gazing at this great God. And then watch what will happen. Your walk will naturally just be an overflow of those two things. You'll live a lifestyle of a product of staring at God. We oftentimes try to tell people, behave, do this, do that, do the other thing. None of it ever works. You know what works? Stare at God, and oh my, I am starting to become more like him. Why? What's your plan? How did you do it? Show me the secret. I have no idea. The more I stare at Jesus, the more I become like him. Stare at what you want to become. This goes in everywhere in life. I can tell you story after story of in the natural things. I'll tell you one story and we'll go to worship. It's kind of a fun little story. When our oldest kid was little, like 4 or 5, he was very natural at throwing things. He had a nice throw and yada, yada, yada. He threw baseball really well. Well, one day he's playing catch with our neighbor, and she's a teenage girl, and she didn't throw good. She had a funny throw. So he comes back out and he's playing catch with me. He's throwing like, I don't want to say it, but he's throwing like a girl. And it was a weird throw. And my wife is out there, and this is what we need each other for too. She says, Zach, this is how we punish kids in our house. You threw wrong, you're going to get in trouble. She says, Zach, throw like Dad and Uncle Mike. He does this. Oh, okay. Boom. All it took was, he was staring at this neighbor for 15 minutes. He started throwing like her. He comes back and he keeps that pattern. And what did it take? It took somebody to say, whack, 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 whack. Wake up and throw like the people you usually stare at. Oh, that makes sense. So here's what we're doing here right now. We're going to go before God. And I want you to, whatever you've been staring at, because you've been throwing bad, here's the fix. Stare at the one who throws perfectly. And you'll start throwing perfectly. Just get your focus back on the great God. So we're just going to take some time. I want you to relax. This is way early. Don't think, oh, no. Restaurants aren't even open yet. We're so early today. But I want us to take this time. I'm really serious about this, because one of the things that's happened is we're expecting us to be like the one we're not seeing. And we've got to see him. We have to see him. We've got to see him. So I'm just going to take some time and relax, and maybe we'll have some direction in this, but I just want us to encounter the living God. That's all. We'll pray for people if you want, but we have there's room in here if you need to go someplace. I will always say this when I'm in a group like this. If you're in a group of a couple hundred people, let's just pretend 200, and you're there you are. But you're thinking, I don't know if I want to do that. What would I look like? Let me tell you, if you're in a group of 200 people here, there are 199 people cheering you on. You got to hear that. There are 199 people wanting you to encounter God right now. That's pretty good odds. So you say, well, gee, I hope I don't look. Listen, there's 199 others wanting you to experience Jesus at the height. So I say that to say you're in really safe company, right? Nobody here is wanting anything but the best for you. And the best is when we see the Lord high and lifted up. So we're going to take some time right now, and I'm telling you, you got to encounter him. You have to. There's no substitute. And this is why some people say, well, hey, you stay in that place until you meet him. And there's something about that where you don't take that literally necessarily today, but you've got to encounter him. So I just want to encourage us, just get before God. Father, here we are, your kids, your children. How blessed it is when your children walk together in unity. How blessed it is. Father, you show up. We know it. We know you show up. So right now I'm praying that every person in this room, and even those watching online, that they would encounter you in a real way, a genuine way that nobody can talk us out of.